So your performance review is that opportunity to highlight what impact have you given the company for the money that they've spent on you, and why should they pay you or continue to pay you more? Okay. When you think of your performance this way, the way you write it's going to be different. Now, I've seen companies do performance reviews a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's just a blank script. Hey, just tell me about your performance this year. It's a single box and you can populate it however you want. Other times I've seen companies break it out into competencies. Hey, talk to me about your leadership skills. Talk to me about managing your team. Talk to me about your job scope. Talk to me about your culture carrying. Talk to me. They break it down into different sections. So no matter how your performance review is structured, within each section that you're able to write about yourself, you should always lead with that impact. Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster. Welcome back, lovelies, to another episode of Secrets of the Corporate Game. I'm your host, Kendall Berg, that career coach. And today we've got a very timely and special episode for you. It is that time of the year where we are starting to write our performance reviews. So we are going to jump in and talk about how to write your performance review effectively, how to write peer reviews to those on your same level or more senior than you, and then how to write your performance reviews for the individuals on your team in order to help them be successful. So we're going to jump right in. When it comes to writing your own performance review, okay, the common mistake that I see people make is we focus a lot on the laundry list of things that we've done over the course of the year. We start to list things like attended certain meetings, was able to deliver X, completed spreadsheet, completed budget, right? We get very tactical when we write our performance reviews, but I want to flip the script and talk about this a little bit differently. So if you were the CEO of a consulting firm, I am the CEO of Kendall Consultancy, and Kendall is my product. And my company was employed by my place of employment. So the company you work for has hired you, Kendall Incorporated, to work for them. How would you, at the end of the year, convince them to renew your contract and pay you more money? That's essentially what a performance review is. A performance review is your opportunity once a year, maybe twice, depending on your company, to tell your employer why they should continue to pay you and perhaps pay you more the next year. And if you were your own business, your own company, you'd probably approach that very differently than as an employee of your company. So if I think of myself as a CEO and I put my CEO hat on and I'm writing my performance review for the last year and I'm trying to convince my company, hey, I have done such great work. Not only should you keep me on staff, you should pay me more. I'm going to focus on the impacts that I drove that company forward, right? So rather than saying I managed my team, I'm going to say I drove efficiency across my team, allowing us to increase productivity by 20% through the management of my organization, including these individuals and these projects, right? I'm going to start with impact, and then I'm going to talk about the what. This should be true of your entire performance review. I didn't just complete X project. I saved the company $50 million annually by driving this project forward to completion. And then we provide details about that project. Okay. So your performance review is that opportunity to highlight what impact have you given the company for the money that they've spent on you, and why should they pay you or continue to pay you more. Okay. When you think of your performance this way, the way you write it's going to be different. Now, I've seen companies do performance reviews a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's just a blank script. Hey, just tell me about your performance this year. It's a single box and you can populate it however you want. Other times I've seen companies break it out into competencies. Hey, talk to me about your leadership skills. Talk to me about managing your team. Talk to me about your job scope. Talk to me about your culture carrying. Talk to me. They break it down into different sections. So no matter how your performance review is structured, within each section that you're able to write about yourself, you should always lead with that impact. Then you talk about the what of what you've done. And then you give supporting examples, right? So if I think about culture, this is one that people tend to have a really hard time writing about. Is like, okay, well, how did I contribute to the culture of a company? Even as a CEO with my CEO hat on, how did I drive the company culture forward? So we can talk about maintaining a good employee experience, right? Maybe that's through managing our team. Maybe that's through rolling out a employee initiative. Maybe you were part of a mentorship program. Maybe you were part of an ERG or a BRG. Maybe you simply contributed to the survey process, right? So when you think of how you carry a company culture forward, you're still creating that impact. You're still impacting the employee experience through the tasks that you're doing, right? Then you give those supporting examples. Worked on the BRG to deliver X event, partnered with women in tech in order to promote more women in our technology teams, right? So think about that impact in each subsection and then tie that to the what of what you've done and then tie it to the tasks. Okay. So this is the tactical how to write your performance review when that time comes around and really sell yourself as an asset to that business. Now, if you're getting to performance review season and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what I did. One, you should always be keeping an accomplishments tracker. I've heard this called a brag book. I've heard it called your win sheet, whatever you want to call it. You can get it for free on my website, thatcareercoach.net. If you sign up for my mailing list, it'll come straight to your email box. I have an Excel one that I personally use to track my accomplishments, and so does everyone on my team. You don't have to use that template. You can use your own, but you should be tracking all year long all of the things you're working on. That is so important because we all think, oh, I'm not going to forget that project that I did in January. And then it's September and it's time to write your performance review. And we're like, oh my gosh, what did I do last week? So it's important to keep a list of everything that you're doing. One of the ways I like to do this is I, every month, send a recap of the work me and my team has done with the impact and the what to my boss and his boss. And then I save all of those in a folder. So then when it comes time to write my performance review, I've got 8 months of those emails already saved in a file ready to go. Okay. So you should be tracking your accomplishments. Second thing you need to do in preparation for your performance review is you need to have the right ceremonies in place. So when it's time to do your performance review, you should meet with your boss, your skip level, and anyone else you think is influential in your performance review about a month before performance reviews are due. Okay. So my company performance reviews are done at the end of September. This is pretty common, end of September, mid-October. That tends to be the timeline. So I would want to meet with all 3 of those resources middle of September would be best case. Now, in those conversations, we don't want to say, hey, performance reviews are coming up. Write a nice one, right? Or what can I expect? Those conversations need to be very targeted. So one, if you're looking for a promotion, you need to bring that up. Hey, I know we're going to performance review cycle. Last time we spoke, I had mentioned that I was interested in getting promoted in the next 3 to 6 months. Do we feel that I'm still on track at that? Here are some examples of how I feel like I've been able to deliver at the next level and really highlight that. The reason we want that meeting right before we go into performance review cycle is because when they go to write your review, we want to be top of mind. We all assume that our boss is thinking about us as much as we think about them. Okay. The reality is they're not. They're busy. They've got their own book of work, their own stuff that they're doing, and they're focused on them. They're focused on their performance review. They're focused on their relationship with their boss. They are not focused on how you've been doing, even when it's time to write your review. So we want to kind of be fresh in their mind. We want to remind them of what we've done right before they go in to write those performance reviews. And again, we don't want this to be an uncomfortable, like, here's a list of my accomplishments. We want to say, hey, going to this performance review cycle, I feel I've been able to deliver quite a lot this year. I pulled together some of my largest examples. Here you go. Just wanted to touch base because last time we spoke, I was on track for promotion. I was on track for a raise. We felt good about my performance this year. Whatever it is you're expecting out of your performance review, we want to remind them of that. And then we want to communicate those big wins. And we want to just touch base and get feedback. We don't want to be surprised when performance reviews come out later. Okay, so you're going to meet with them right before performance reviews are due. Then a good rule of thumb is that roughly 2 months after performance reviews are due, there's usually a cross calibration of some kind. So I've seen companies do this different ways, and I have a whole podcast episode on cross calibrations that we will tag in the show notes if you want to go listen to that one, because I don't want to talk about it all over again. But usually cross calibrations take place about 2 months later. And this is where all of the leadership gets together and they say, okay, well, how does Kendall compare to her peers? Does Kendall deserve to have a high performance rating based on the work she delivered this year? Where does Kendall have areas of opportunity? And the purpose of cross calibrations is not to be a popularity contest, though sometimes that can happen. It's really to give all the individuals in the company the opportunity to be assessed fairly against their peers, right? So the goal isn't to compare apples and oranges and say, well, Kendall did a worse job than this data scientist who's in a totally different division than she is. But it's to say, hey, for this level of seniority, for this type of work, how does Kendall compare to her peers? And then does her performance review reflect that? It also gives most companies an opportunity to get a perspective from somebody other than your boss. So where you have a good boss, maybe this isn't as important. But when you have a bad boss, those cross calibrations are life-saving because now you've got all of your boss's peers talking about how great you are because you've been networking in advance and you've got good relationships because you listen to my podcast. And so now you've got other voices standing up for you. This is why self-advocacy and networking are so important. And again, I have a whole separate episode on how to network and who to network with. You can go check that out. But really, those cross calibrations allow you to be compared to your peers. Now, I've seen that sometimes be directors and above. I've seen that be heads of and above. I've seen that be a panel instead of a cross cal of all the leaders. Maybe it's just 5 leaders who weigh in on you. I've also seen it be more of like a casual conversation where like your boss, their peers, and their boss get together in a room and chat about it. Okay. But there's always some type of evaluation of your performance review. So a good rule of thumb is we're going to meet, let's say mid-September, to prep for performance reviews. We're going to meet with our boss, meet with our skip level, meet with any key stakeholders, touch base with them, our influencer list. And then in about the mid-November timeframe, 2 months later, we're going to do the same thing again. But we're not going to talk about our wins again. We're not going to refresh it. We're just going to touch base. Hey, here's what's going on right now. Here's what I'm working on. If you are up for promotion or a raise, you will bring that back up in the November meeting. Hey, when we spoke in September, it seemed like things were on track for my promotion. Just want to touch base, see if there's anything else I need to be aware of. Okay, same for a raise. Then we want to do the same thing, end of January, beginning of February. So about, you guessed it, 2 to 3 months later. Okay. And the reason we're going to do this so much in this time span is because all of the decisions about the future of your career are being made really in this 5-month period between September and February. Most companies follow this cycle. If they're on a standard annual calendar, they do a September write your review, November review reviews, January finalize bonuses, March communicate. That's almost always the cadence that all of these companies follow, which is why having these meetings are so important. Now, if you've been following me for a while and you already have weekly one-on-ones with your boss and you already have bi-monthly one-on-ones with your skip level, then you already have the structure in place for these meetings. You don't have to schedule anything extra. Right now, you want to use that time wisely. You want to repurpose it for these conversations, but odds are you don't have to do very much. If you have your influencer list and you're meeting with them quarterly, great, move your quarterly meetings to that November timeframe so that they're ready right before they go into cross calibrations. Okay. So these are all the tips to really prep for your performance review to be as successful as possible. But the great thing about performance review season is we're also reviewing other people. So we're going to talk a little bit about what to do when it comes time to write a performance review for a peer or a manager. So this is a sensitive area. Okay. Now, if you are strategic, which you are, because you listen to my podcast. Okay. If you're strategic, you're requesting peer reviews from peers with whom you think you have good relationships. Okay. And I hear a lot of people say, yeah, but I want to be unbiased. I want to get constructive feedback. If you want constructive feedback, great. Have a one-on-one with somebody who you don't get along with as well and ask them to tell you what's going on or ask them to write it in an email. Do not use the once a year documented formal performance review process to solicit feedback from that person. Let's be smart about this. Okay. So you're going to solicit feedback from your peers who you have a good relationship with, and you're going to solicit feedback from your boss. You're going to solicit feedback maybe from some employees who work for you or some stakeholders you interact with, right? People are going to do the same thing to you. Now, I'm always surprised who asks for feedback from me every year. It's like a big shock. But sometimes we need to give constructive feedback. Okay. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you're finding the information on this podcast helpful and you're looking to take control of your career and start to elevate yourself to the next level, go ahead and check out our course. Go to bit.ly/career coach course to get signed up today and to start taking your career to the next level and navigate the secrets of the career game. But in a performance review, the mistake I see people make is they either go way too negative, right? They're really direct, really assertive with their feedback to their peers or to their boss, or they don't give any feedback at all and they're way too nice. And both of these situations are bad, and I'll tell you why. If you're too direct and aggressive and negative in your feedback, you can destroy that relationship. And if this is somebody that you're working with regularly, if this is your boss, if this is your peer on your team, if this is your stakeholder, even though these can be anonymous, they will read that feedback. And odds are they'll know who submitted it. And so you are potentially destroying a relationship for the opportunity to get something off your chest in an unproductive way, right? It doesn't harness good empathy, good people skills, good communication skills. So we'll talk about how to do that better in a minute. But on the flip side, if you give this really fluffy, like, Steve is great. I love Steve. Steve makes me happy. Steve does great work. Steve is so nice. Nobody's taking your feedback seriously anyways, because their boss is going to simply discount that and be like, oh, well, she wrote this really fluffy, nice feedback about Steve. Great. Steve's great. Fine. But they're not going to take it into consideration when really evaluating his performance, because it doesn't tell you anything about what Steve has done well or where he needs to improve. And so it's always important to have a really good balance between the two. So the way that I like to write my performance reviews is, one, we are always going to stick to a compliment sandwich. I don't care if you hate this person. I don't care if they have every trigger on your 11 list. I don't care if I do care if they like threw a shoe at you in a conference room. In that case, you should have already reported them to HR and this should be a non-issue. But in the missing space of them not having an HR complaint filed against them, we're going to compliment sandwich. And what that means is we're going to start with something nice. We're going to lean into constructive feedback, and then we're going to end with something nice. The reason is, when we read something like this, it doesn't negate the feedback. It doesn't keep us from hearing the constructive criticisms that may be present, but it gives the person the opportunity to hear both how you're praising and how you're helping them improve in the same breath. And this is why compliment sandwiches are really important. This is important in general in giving feedback, but especially in your written reviews. So an example of this would be, Steve does a great job at managing a really high workload. I think he has an opportunity to streamline some of his processes in order to find more balance in his work and to avoid missing deadlines. But overall, Steve follows through on his projects, and I'm excited when I know he's on a project I'm working on. Okay, so the positives were, he has a big workload. I'm excited to work with him on projects. The negative was, he has such a big workload, he needs to figure that out, right? But in the way that we tell that story, it is constructive. It reads positive, and it's much more palatable to both Steve and Steve's manager, right? One of my favorite ways to give constructive feedback. So if you're struggling with how to phrase it, you're like, hey, I want to tell this dude they suck at X, but I don't want to get in trouble for it. One of my favorite ways to write this is, it's been really great watching Steve step into a role where he can take on more challenging projects. I look forward to seeing Steve improve his time management and project management skills as he gets more exposure and more context in the space. Overall, I really enjoy working with Steve on my projects. So did you catch it in there? The constructive is, I've enjoyed seeing him step into this space where he's managing more work. I look forward to seeing him continue to improve his time management and project management skills. Okay, look forward to seeing him continue to improve implies, one, that he's on the right trajectory. He's already growing in the right direction. Two, that you support him. You're not trying to tear him down. You're not saying he sucks. You're just saying, hey, he's going to continue to grow. And I look forward to seeing that continued growth from him. And three, it still calls out what you need him to do, which is to improve his time management and project management skills. But it does it in a way that's highly supportive of that individual. So if you're trying to give feedback to someone in their performance reviews and you're struggling with, like, man, how do I tell them they need to be more strategic? They need to improve their management skills. They need to improve their time management skills. They need to improve their communication, written communication. That's a great way to say, like, hey, I see them stepping into this space. I look forward to watching them continue to improve that skill as they get more context and experience. It's a really nice way to deliver that. So if you're struggling with words, that's a great like copy and paste that you can use. I find that this is really helpful, especially for new managers, because when somebody is new to management, one, odds are they haven't gotten any training. For whatever reason, we don't train our managers. And two, they're probably making all kinds of fumbles early on. All of us did it. I did it. If I managed you 10 years ago, I'm sorry. I very much am sorry. Okay. So they're probably making fumbles. They're probably insecure. They're probably learning new skills. They're probably getting new support that they didn't have before. So we don't want to tear them down and be like, man, they really need to work on their management skills. But we can say, hey, stepping into a new role as a manager, I look forward to seeing their continued growth as they get more experience and context here. That's great. That is supportive. That is encouraging, and yet gives the feedback that they need to hear. So that's specifically for peers or managers or supervisors, right? A few years ago, I was asked to give feedback on my skip level to my double skip level. And after having a quick panic attack, this is exactly the template that I followed. And the reason for that is, one, I think really, really highly of my skip level. And so it was easier to give a lot of positive feedback because I think he's really great. But also, when we're providing constructive feedback, the goal is not to tear somebody down in the process. That's not constructive. That doesn't help them. And like I said, they're going to find out about it. That's not good either. Right. And we also don't want to give a bunch of fluff of like, they're the best person on the planet. And then it's not worth anything to them and it doesn't help their career either. So that's your peers and managers. Now, here's what to do when you manage people and you need to write a performance review for them. So generally, you are still going to stick to the compliment sandwich. The reason for this is it's just easier for people to read. If you want to give more verbal constructive feedback when you walk through the performance review together, you can absolutely do that. But generally, writing in the compliment sandwich just makes it easier to take that feedback because odds are most companies submit the written to the individual before you do the verbal walkthrough, and we don't want them to misconstrue something. So generally, you're still going to stick to compliment sandwich. Where there are exceptions to this is individuals who are already on coaching plans, PIPs, performance reviews. If they have already been told they are that close to getting fired, then the feedback you need to give them in their performance review needs to be consistent with that messaging. If you haven't hit your numbers in 6 months, you haven't hit your numbers in 6 months. That needs to be written and verbal. Okay, HR would advise you the same way. So if they're on any type of coaching plan, you need to be more direct in your performance review. The second is if there have been large misses. So for example, let's say we're going to stick on the culture theme. And we have an individual who gets in a screaming match in a conference room. Now, maybe they appropriately apologized after, they went through HR training, they've been improving, but they still did that at some point in this calendar year. We may not compliment sandwich the communication. We may say, hey, you had a big miss early on in the year, as we discussed at that time, as you went through HR training. I have seen an improvement since then that I look forward to continuing as we go into the new year. But that is going to keep you from getting a 5. Maybe it gets you a 3 or it gets you a 2, right? So when there's been an egregious act or a big miss, we also want to be more direct in that written review. The reason that these two situations get you kind of an exemption clause from the compliment sandwich is because those are going to be your written proof if you have to performance manage this individual in the future. A big mistake I see managers make is they give this really positive year-end review, and then February comes around and they're trying to fire that person. And HR is like, yeah, you can't. You just gave them like a 4 and a great review, right? There's nothing to show over time change. And maybe we did it because we were nice. We didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. We didn't want to affect their bonus. But the reality is if somebody is that close to needing to be performance managed, it needs to be explicitly written in their performance review. This brings me to my last note for managers writing performance reviews. There should be no surprises in your performance review to your people. This is a huge pet peeve of mine. Huge. So I'm going to say it again. There should be no surprises to any individual in your team when they read their performance review. If you got to the end of the year and you never gave feedback to this person that they were doing something wrong, and then you chuck it into that performance review that goes on to written HR level documentation, that sucks, right? It sucks because that individual had no chance to improve that skill, no chance to turn it around, no chance to act on your constructive feedback. And instead, they're blindsided by it at the time where it impacts their bonus. If you are a manager managing people, you should at least twice a year, if not quarterly, be having very targeted conversations about how people are performing compared to the expectation. And they should be documented. So for me, twice a year, I do a performance eval with everybody on my team, and I write an email. And I say, hey, based on your goals you submitted at the beginning of the year, here's how I feel you're tracking on each one. And here's what I want to see in the second half of the year. And here's my overall feedback. You're doing great in these areas. I need to see improvement in these areas. This is where I want us to focus for the second half. It's very explicit. My company does not require a mid-year review, but I do this anyways. And I send it in an email and I give it to them in written form. And the reason for that is, one, it helps them. If I were to blindside them at the end of the year, which I would never do, because again, very large pet peeve, I want them to have documentation to fall back on that says like, hey, this doesn't align with at all what we talked about in June. But also for them, I want them to have clear instruction. Here's what you need to do in the second half of the year if you want to get a good review. I want you to improve your communication skills. I want you to show up timely. I want you to be more proactive. I want you to really own this project. I want you to interact with stakeholders more, right? What is it they need to do? Be clear early on and then stick to that at performance review. I see it all the time as a coach. Clients will come to me and say, I just got my performance review. So March is like my favorite month of the year because every client in the US is like, hey, I just got my performance review and it sucks. Help me. And there's always something in there that the boss never mentioned to them. Always. And that is so demoralizing and frustrating that is how you lose good people. So if you're a manager writing performance reviews and you realize you're about to write something you've never mentioned to that person, you need to talk about it with them in their next one-on-one immediately. Like, oh man, I realized when I was writing a performance review, we set a goal to do X and we never did that. I don't want to penalize you because it was deprioritized, or hey, we need to figure out how to get this done by the end of the year or we're going to have a problem when performance reviews come out. Give them time. Even if that time is just the remaining 3.5 months that we have this year, give them some time. And now I'm going to get off my soapbox. Okay. So these are your performance reviews: how to write them for yourself, how to write them for a peer and a manager, and how to write them for your employees in a way that is constructive and helpful to the overall company. As always, if you have any questions, you can always email me, Kendall@thatcareercoach.net, or check out my website, thatcareercoach.net, for coaching information and the opportunity to work with me. Otherwise, we'll be back again next week with another awesome episode, and we appreciate you tuning in. Give us 5 stars on your review and leave any questions in the comments below. We'll get back to you.